1982, I was in Brazil and had the joy of being able to talk with a missionary couple, husband and wife, who had been trained in linguistics. They didn't learn a specific language, they learned the laws of languages. And then they were, as a missionary team, assigned to a tribe up in the headwaters of the Amazon River in the western part of Brazil, to live with a tribe of several hundred people that nobody could talk with. Nobody knew the language. It was totally unknown and different. And so all they did was concentrate on learning the language, developing understanding of the grammar and the vocabulary. And so after about 2 years, they had a pretty good grasp of the language. Did no preaching at all. But at about that 2-year mark, a young man in the group of people, that tribe, came to them and said, "What is the name of the man who died for my sins?" And they were astounded. He had seen from creation that there had to be somebody who was responsible for it. And he knew in his heart that he had been doing things that were not pleasing to that Creator. And he wanted to get right with the Creator. And the Holy Spirit let him know that his problem had been taken care of. That's what this verse is about. And so they were very happy to tell him who did that for him. Isn't that amazing? And that's not an isolated incident, but I got to hear it directly from the people who experienced it. Those were the location of the eyes, and these eyes are absolutely remarkable. They are compound eyes, and they have between 700 to 15,000 individual lenses. And with the shape of that eye, and with it being raised up, there's nearly a 360-degree field of vision. But what makes these absolutely amazing is these lenses are made out of inorganic mineral matter, calcite, calcium carbonate. But what's astounding to me is to think of this as a living organism has this inorganic lens. How in the world could something like that evolve? So these are two different shapes which lead to accurate perception of distance underwater. And then we have the lens designed for the human being. Comparing this, you see that our lens is bulging outward on both sides and doesn't have the type of shapes that those two that see true underwater distance. This is water bear. Tardigrade is the name, and when the eggs hatch, this is amazing. They have all the cells they will ever have. So how in the world do they grow after they hatch out? Well, the cells have to get bigger in size, so that's how they grow. It's not by cells dividing, but simply by cells getting bigger. Very different than how everybody else does that. But they also can survive dehydration for a decade. They can go into a dormant state. They go from 85% to 2% of their body water. So they shrink down and just sit there waiting for conditions to get good again. Astounding. Dr. Randy Galuza, who's now currently the president of Institute for Creation Research, has so hit the nail on the head with continual environmental tracking. And that, you know, at all the levels, starting at the whole organismal level, at the organ system level, at the tissue level, at the cellular level, at the molecular pathway level. The environment is being tracked all the time with feedback mechanisms, whether to turn something on or off, so that it should or shouldn't be happening for the new conditions in the environment at that particular level. It is fantastic. It's totally an engineering. You know, God put Dr. Galuza in that position after having him be an engineer who worked as an engineer, and then as a physician who worked as a physician, and putting it all together. I mean, he is the man to be doing this. The organisms in the Darwinian picture are the victims of the environment. They're the passive victims. But that's not the case. The organisms are the active agents responding through the environmental tracking, and then through programmed systems at the molecular level and higher levels, then respond accordingly to the changed environmental conditions and adapt. But it's not natural selection. It's highly designed systems that are all in the DNA. There is more than one code in the very same stretch of DNA. There are at least 5 codes that have been identified. All of this is in these supplemental codes that are overlapping totally in that very same stretch of DNA. This is something that could not have ever evolved, period. It's impossible, absolutely impossible. It's amazing, it's absolutely astounding. It is mind-blowing. And in the professional meetings, with all this new information in genetics that we've had over the last 20 years, the evolutionary geneticists are flailing around saying, what do we do? What do we do? Because they realize the Darwinian model is dead. Now, do they publicize that to the world? No, because they don't have anything to substitute it with. But they know that the neo-Darwinian model is gone. So it's a dead man walking. But they're not informing the general public about that.
So if they're so convinced that the Darwinian model is gone, are any of them considering creation?
You know, I think some that probably do, but they're not going to publicize it because then they lose their job or their grant money. Only about 1.5% of the DNA is actually responsible for the production of proteins. So what does the other 98.5% do? It has 2 other functions. One is regulation. The other function is organization, of keeping the DNA organized. What is the biggest weakness the evolutionists have? To me, it's being exposed that everything in their thought process is based on assumption followed by circular reasoning. They suffer a heart disease, heart attitude disease. Even when things are so obviously created, they still try to find some way to fool themselves into thinking that they have found some logical explanation, avoiding the design and the designer.